Good evening. This is going to be the top 10 medicinal herbs that you can grow here in Santa Cruz with the lovely and talented Paula Grainger, the English herbalist. She's kind of a local, a rock star, really. So we're really very lucky to have her. Thank you all for being here. First, as usual, we have to, I'm sure we're all getting used to Zoom by now, but a few tips and tricks. You're going to begin with a microphone muted. That's because there's so many of us, it would be cacophony if we tried to talk. Please keep your video off so we can save bandwidth for people that have low bandwidth. Speaker view is recommended. That's probably going to be your best experience. Use the chat window and or the Q&A function. Chat is really for comments to the group or to a specific individual, and Q&A are questions that we'll keep track of and answer your questions at the end of the program. I will try and consolidate those that are similar, and we will feed them back to Paula. So you can ask questions at any time. If you look down at the bottom of your screen, you'll see something called CC Live Transcript. That's a button that will turn on closed captioning in case you're having trouble hearing. And for technical assistance, if you have any issues, chat directly with Vanessa Ackerman, who is our tech hostess. And after class, this question will come up many times during the show, during the presentation, but we will send this presentation. We will send a link to this recorded video and any other resources that Paula has for us to your email after class. So wait a couple days and those should show up. This class, workshop, and others are sponsored by the Friends of the UCSC Farm and Garden. And we are the friends group that support and advocate for the CASFIS website and garden project. You can become a friend for very little money. It's a very reasonable thing. And it's kind of an awesome boon for those of us who garden. You get 10% off seeds and plants and tools at San Lorenzo Garden Center, Sierra Azul, and plants at the Garden Company. And that is, for me, the biggest benefit. And of course, the feeling that you are supporting this incredible organic farming program that is going to ultimately save our bacon and change the world. So there's a link in the presentation that you'll get later in case you want to join later, or you can join right now. And there it is in the chat for you. Thank you. And now I'm going to let Paula introduce herself. Thanks, Paula.
Thank you, Delise. I second your suggestion that everyone becomes a friend, because I really love showing my card at the garden centre and getting those discounts. So good evening, and thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Paula Grainger, and as you'll see here on the slide, I'm a herbal medicine graduate of the University of Westminster in London in the UK. I'm obviously English, and I studied herbal medicine there. It's a little bit different over there. So it's the herbs I studied is very much coming from a Western perspective. So it's coming from a more similar point of view to how the body works and so on, as conventional Western medicine, the kind that you go and see your doctor about. So we've got less of that kind of different paradigm around it that, like, for example, Chinese medicine would have, or Ayurveda would have. That said, I do work within a kind of energetic system as well, and you'll hear me say some things about herbs tonight that don't sound strictly medical, and that's because I use them in both of those ways at the same time. My day job is I'm a practicing clinical herbalist. In the UK, I'm a medical herbalist, but we're not allowed to use that word here in the US. So here I'm a clinical herbalist, or herbalist, which is another word I pronounce differently. But as well as seeing people on a one-to-one basis for herbal wellness consultations, I also teach about herbs and I write about them too. And I've published a couple of books around herbal medicine, one on herb teas, and one on a class of herbs called adaptogens, which are these amazing herbs which kind of help your body deal with stress and the effects of stress, and minimize the damage that stress can do to your body, which is something I think we're all thinking about after the last year and a half. I also grow and make my own herbal medicines. So I'm a gardener, probably not the best gardener in the world, but I love plants. I've always grown them. And increasingly over the years, I've added more and more medicinal herbs to my garden, which is on the upper west side of town, quite near to the university. So I'm learning all the time about how to grow my herbal medicine. And I make things out of it as well. I make tinctures and all kinds of other things. I also make a range of products, and you may have come across me at various fairs, normally around the kind of holiday period, because I tend to focus it around that time of year. I make a range of products called the English Herbalist, for obvious reasons. And that's kind of skincare, and I do teas and things like that. So if I can have the next slide, please. Thank you. So tonight we're going to talk about the top 10 herbs to grow in Santa Cruz that you can use as medicine. A lot of these also have culinary applications, which you're probably aware of, but I'll kind of mention them as we go along as well. But my focus tends to be on the medicinal uses and benefits. I often teach a class called 30 herbs to grow in Santa Cruz, and I had to pick out 10 to fit within the time that we have here. And it's always hard to pick favorites. But what I tried to do was select ones which I know grow pretty well in Santa Cruz, things you can get hold of, and we're under resources at the end. I'll have some information about where you can get herbs, but you should be able to get hold of all of these pretty easily. A little bit about what they like in terms of their growing requirements. And then we're also talking about preparations, what you do with the herbs once you've got them. And then, as I said, sourcing. We're going to have questions and answers at the end. And as Delise said there, if you have any questions as we go along, type them in the chat and she will throw them at me at the end. So thank you. I do need to say this. It's important to say this because safety is critical, of course. So, you know, we always say that this type of class is for educational purposes. You really should consult your medical practitioner before you start trying to self-treat with herbs. And I would emphasize that if you're pregnant, nursing, taking medication, you really should seek out qualified guidance before you're using herbs for your health, other than the very mildest ones. And that might be seeing a herbalist who's qualified, or talking to your doctor. I do not recommend Dr. Google, particularly in this circumstance, because there's a lot of misleading stuff out there on the internet. As we go through with each herb, you'll notice I've put contraindications at the end of each one. I haven't added in these 3 scenarios: pregnant, nursing, or taking medication. Just take that as read. Take that as a given, that work on that assumption that you do need to be aware of those things. So we can move on. So I'm going to talk a little bit first about the herbal preparations, and you'll see I've mentioned individual ways of using them on each of the individual herbs. Probably one I haven't mentioned here on herbal preparations is just eating it, or making a tea from the fresh plant. And that's a lovely, lovely way to use herbs. But obviously they aren't always in season, or they're not always in your garden. Sometimes you have a glut of stuff and then it's gone a few months later. So it's really nice, and a kind of fundamental part of being an herbalist, going all the way back through history, that you find ways to preserve what you grow, to preserve it and sometimes concentrate it, so that you can, it's there in your herbal medicine cabinet or your herbal medicine chest to use whenever you want it. So one of the most traditional and cheapest and easiest ways of preserving your herbs is to dry them. And I'll talk a little bit how you do this with each herb as we go along. Once you've got your dried herbs, it's really important to keep them in a cool, dark place out of light. Light and air are the enemy of dried herbs, because they'll oxidize and they'll lose some of that medicinal quality. So you really want to keep them in a cool, dark place, either in a dark jar. I keep mine in clear glass jars, but they're in drawers. So they're, and the other ones are in a cupboard. I've got them all over the place. That's a really nice way to store them, to keep them kind of strong and potent, and kind of hold in that medicinal quality. And once you've got your dried herbs, you can use them to make tea. And I'm sure everyone here has at least had a herbal tea. Probably a lot of you drink them regularly. When you're making herbal teas, I would say make them strong. I tend to use like 2 teaspoonfuls to a mug of hot water, and let them steep for a while, like 10 minutes, or even just leave it in there. And you can use a teapot. You can do it in a little, you can buy little tea bags, little medicinal tea bags. You can even just use like a French press or just like a jug and then cover it and then strain it out to a strainer. It can be as complicated or as simple as you like. And also decoctions. If you've taken Chinese herbs, you're probably familiar with the idea of decoctions. And basically that's a cooked tea. So when you make a decoction, you're putting your herbs into a pan of hot water, bringing it up to just below boiling point and then simmering it. Depending on what it is you're doing, if it's leaves, not so long. If it's roots or seeds, they're thicker and that are dried, they're thicker and harder and they take longer. But basically just slowly cooking that down to break down the herb and release all of the constituents that are in there into the water. And you can then strain it out and drink it. You can also use it as a base for a syrup as well if you decoct things. The second way is tinctures, and this is probably the way I use herbs most commonly, partly because I was trained that way, partly because it's convenient for people and it gives me flexibility. So if you were to visit my house, you would see I've got cupboards full of tinctures, individual tinctures of all the different herbs that I use on a regular basis. And basically a tincture is the herb macerated in alcohol, and it's typically for about 2 weeks. It sits there basically just giving up its constituents to the alcohol. And then you can strain it out and you end up with something that has great keeping abilities. You don't need to refrigerate it or anything like that. It's highly flexible because you can blend different tinctures together, and that's the way I work as an herbalist, you know, basically coming up with a prescription and mixing different herbs together for someone. And it's also quite convenient because you just take like a few dropperfuls or like a teaspoonful in a little bit of water, knock it back, and that's it, you're done. You've taken your herbs for the day. And you typically might do that once, twice, 3 times a day, depending on what you're taking. A bit of difference here, if any of you have ever kind of studied tincture making with any American herbalists, you'll see that they predominantly follow the kind of Michael Moore, very famous American herbalist, way of doing it, which is particularly with fresh plants. And I love to make my tinctures with fresh plants whenever I can. It's one of the reasons I love to grow my own herbs, is that I can just literally pick the plant and turn it into a tincture. He uses very, very high level of alcohol, like 95, 96% alcohol. I was not trained that way. And in the UK and Europe, our tinctures tend to be much weaker in terms of the alcohol. And I think there's a few arguments for that. As long as it's 25% alcohol, it will preserve very well. When you make a tincture, the water-soluble constituents come out into water, and the alcohol constituents, sorry, the oil-soluble constituents come out into the alcohol. And you want those water-soluble constituents. So by using a lower strength of alcohol, even though there's water in the plant, you're going to extract both the water and the oil-soluble constituents. So I tend to make mine with vodka or Everclear, mostly vodka, to be honest. And I still hit that kind of 25%. It's worth wilting the plant down a little bit before you put it into the tincture. So like I'll cut my lemon balm, lay it out in a shady or sunny place for an hour or two, just to let it wilt and lose some of that water. Then I'll chop it and put it into the alcohol. And the other thing I would say about making tinctures is it's really critical that the level of the alcohol is at least an inch or so higher than the surface of the plant. Now that can be tricky because plants want to float. So you can use like a sterilized stone, you can use a weight that you would use for pickling, one of those tops off a wet jar, small saucer, whatever you've got, just to weigh the plant down. Because it needs to be submerged. If you let it sit for 2 weeks with the plant sticking out above the level of the alcohol, it's going to go moldy and oxidize, and you don't want that. I could do this whole hour and a half on tincture making, but I want to talk about other things as well, but put your questions in the chat. Next up is infused oils, and you're probably familiar with things like garlic oil that you use internally. But herbally, these tend to be the way we make things that we use in salves, or we use as a straight infused oil. and in other preparations for topical use. That's external use. So there's lots of herbs that I will infuse in oil. Sometimes sweet almond oil, grapeseed is good. I often use really good extra virgin olive oil. It's a really nice sort of base oil to infuse my oils into. And I'll just point out that this is different from essential oils. Essential oils, which I haven't covered in this, because unless you have a still, you're not going to be distilling your own essential oils, because that's how they're produced. They basically are distilled, and the volatile oils of the plant come off and are then condensed and collected. You get tiny amounts for a large amount of plant, and you need quite specialized equipment. So if you haven't got a still for it, you're not going to be doing that. And that's different from an infused oil, where you're taking a base oil and then infusing the plant into it. And you really do it the same as a tincture, apart from the fact that it's nice to have a little warmth or heat. So I've got a sunny wall in my garden, and I tend to do them out in the garden on the wall. And that works really well. Just the heat from the sun will gently warm the heat and help those constituents to come out. And then the other preparation I've mentioned here is vinegars and syrups. So vinegars are basically do it the same way as tincture. And for those people who don't want to use alcohol, that can be a really good option. I tend to use good quality live apple cider vinegar, because that has its own medical benefits. And syrups. So you might, for example, be familiar with elderberry syrup or echinacea syrup. And basically to make that, you just make a decoction and then boil it down reduce it by about half. And then you can add in sugar or honey. I love using local honey. I've got a lot of friends around here who are beekeepers, so I love using their honey. And just again, equal quantity at least to the amount of the decoction that you have. Warm the decoction, stir it in until it's fully melted, and that will need to be kept in the fridge. But it's a nice way to use herbs. It's quite, if it's for things like sore throats or all the smoke inhalation we were all suffering last year. Honey is very soothing for the chest all on its own. It tastes good, so it's easier to get other members of your family to take it, and it doesn't have alcohol. So that's a really nice way to use herbs. So as I said, there's a lot to say about how you prepare your herbs, but those are some sort of basic ways, and there's some books later on that you can kind of read for more information on that. And you're also always welcome to contact me and ask questions, and my contact details will be later on as well. So I'm going to take a swig of my tea as we pause and a breath, and here we go. So the first of the herbs that I wanted to talk about tonight is Calendula. You all know it. It's a beautiful perennial, well, not perennial, it's annual, but it's perennial in the sense that it's always growing around somewhere. It's sometimes considered that name Calendula comes from calendar, from that same root, and this idea that it's always kind of popping up and growing, particularly in our climate. You use the whole flower head. And actually, before I get into that, I'm just going to mention as well, you'll see on these, I put the botanical name. It's really important that you get the right botanical name, because common names can vary from place to place, from retailer to retailer. So in England, this is called pot marigold and is often referred to as marigold. Whereas here, marigold tends to refer to the Mexican marigold, which is a completely different plant and has different qualities. So when you're buying plants, always take a look at the label and make sure that that botanical name matches what you're reading in the references of where you're getting the plants from. So yeah, calendula, you use the whole flower, including that kind of big seed bit in the middle. And you want to pick it like these ones right at the peak when it's fully flowering. So you're going to pick it during the day because it closes up at night. And you can then use it for a whole bunch of things. It's one of the herbs that we use both internally and externally. So internally, you can take it as a tea or a tincture, and it's used for lymphatic support. It's a really good antifungal. So if you've got a yeast infection or anything like that, it's a good herb to take at that point internally. And it's also an anti-inflammatory. And when I say lymphatic support there, I'm talking about things like if you've been sick and you're left with swollen lymph glands, if you have had any kind of infection, really, that will take a toll on your lymphatic system. And also if you've got things like water retention, where it can really help to kind of move the lymph and get things moving. It's a really beautiful herb to use in that way. And that anti-inflammatory quality is really good as well. It's also antimicrobial, so it kills off bugs, not just funguses, but other bugs too. And that's one of the areas where it's most useful from an external point of view. So I would typically make an infused oil, and this is something that infuses really nicely in the sunshine on a sunny wall, either using the dried herb, and you can use the fresh as well. If you're going to use fresh, just let it wilt a little bit. And then be very careful when you pour off the oil, leave a little bit at the bottom, because any water that's in there that was in the petals will sink to the bottom. Obviously, oil and water separate. So it's also got a sort of third use as well, which is, I always think, kind of half topical, half internal, and that's things like toothache or gum disease or all those kind of mouth type problems. Because it's got this really strong anti-inflammatory effect, and it reduces infection or the danger for infection, you can use it that way too. And you could use the infused oil and swoosh it in that kind of Ayurvedic oil swooshing way. You could also use it as a tincture. And this is one where I make two different preparations of tincture. I make a 25% alcohol, which is my vodka, and that's good for the lymphatics, the anti-inflammatory qualities of it. And then if you've ever picked up a calendula plant, you'll know that they're sticky, they're resinous. You've got a sticky resiny kind of on the surface of the petals. That resin only really dissolves in very high alcohol because it's not water soluble. So I do make a very strong, I actually get hold of Polish spirit, which is stronger than Everclear even in California anyway, because California and Everclear is lower alcohol percentage than it is other places. But there are certain liquor stores around town where you can buy the stronger 95% alcohol. And I'll put dried calendula into that to make a really strong resin-rich tincture, which I wouldn't take internally personally because it doesn't taste good, but I would use it for in a mouthwash for things like, as I say, gum disease, abscesses. You know, not in place of seeing a dentist. If you've got a dental problem, you need to see a dentist. But sometimes you just want to, you can't get to see someone immediately, or you've had some work done and you want to just kind of prevent infection. So it's a really good one to use in those circumstances. Another use for that, infused oil for topical use as well, is anything fungal. So like on babies, you get cradle cap, which is like a scaly fungal infection that they get on their scalps. Adults also tend to get a thing called seborrheic dermatitis, which is the same fungus, and you get bones here and here, typically. And the infused oil of calendula can really help with that as well. It's a pretty safe herb. The main contraindication for it is that it is a member of the daisy family. So if you are allergic to ragweed, for example, you may find that you have a reaction to this. So just be super careful using it, and particularly giving it to children and so on. Yeah, that's calendula. Let's go to our next herb, which is California poppy. You are all familiar with this beautiful plant. I've made very short notes on my slide there, haven't I? Fabulous name, Eschscholtzilia californica. I can never pronounce it properly, but I love that botanical name. You've all seen it growing around. You know it's our state flower, and it is illegal. You may also know it's illegal to pick this from the wild. This is one where you really mustn't go out and pick it from the wild. However, if you don't have it growing wild in your garden like crazy in the summertime, you probably have a friend who does. So hit them up for some of it. And you can use the whole plant. So the leaves, the flower stalks, the seed pods, the root. So you can just pull out the whole plant and like shake off the dirt and use the whole thing. Or you can just be more selective and just take the flowers and the leaves. It's generally considered that the seed pods and the roots are a little bit stronger. It's such a beautiful plant, isn't it? I love it. It works really well as a tincture, and it also works well as a tea. It's only really used internally. And this is, I forgot to tell you about how to grow calendula, didn't I? Full sun, but otherwise it's very tolerant, calendula. But Carl poppy is going to be happiest in full sun. It's best grown from seed. It doesn't transplant that well in my experience, and it's an annual which will merrily self-seed all over the garden once you've got it established. And you know, it likes a less rich soil, although it appears to me to grow pretty much anywhere here. It likes it, you would imagine, it's native, and it likes the conditions here. But you know, you see it growing on the most barren hillsides as you drive through California, and then equally I see it growing in my or my friends' very heavily enriched garden beds, you know, and it's totally happy and growing well there. So it's pretty tolerant and friendly herb. And one of its main uses is for insomnia. It's quite a good sedative. So it's not like a hit you over the head sedative, but it quietens the mind, reduces pain and anxiety. So if you're having some kind of pain issues around your sleep, it's very good for that. And I tend to find it best for helping people get to sleep rather than necessarily keeping them asleep. It's got a really nice ability. If you're having trouble just quietening at the end of the day and getting some sleep, it can really ease you into that. But it seems to me to be fairly short acting. So if I've got someone who's waking up a lot in the night, I'll tend to give them other herbs alongside it. And it is helpful for that pain piece as well. So, you know, you can use it during the day as well. People often ask, you know, it's poppy, is it like an opium poppy? Does it have opiates? It does not. However, it is almost similar enough that if you've got a job where you get drug tested on a regular basis, you wouldn't want to be taking a lot of California poppy, just in case. I've not, you know, it's one of those theoretical things where you just want to be on the safe side. Better safe than sorry. Although in practice, I've not had anyone who's had a problem with that, but there is that potential there. So that comes under the contraindications. Otherwise, it's pretty safe herb. You know, it's a nice one for children, actually, if you can get them to drink the tea, or if you're comfortable giving them a few drops of tincture, just to help them sleep and calm them down, and relax them. It's a nice, relaxing herb, gentle and effective, which is what we like in a herb, certainly what I like in a herb. So Delise, we can move on to our next herb. German chamomile. Oh my gosh, I love this so much. This was mine growing this summer. As you can see, it's tangled up with a bunch of other things in there. So what to say about German chamomile? Well, first is make sure, you know, I said before, you want to make sure the botanical name is right. This one has two, actually, Chamomilla recutita and Matricaria recutita. This summer, I saw some German chamomile in a local garden center, which was not, it was Roman chamomile. And they're used, you can use them interchangeably, but I really do find German chamomile is a better herb for the things I'm talking about medicinally tonight. It should have that very distinctive appley taste. If you don't know what I mean, either go and smell some proper German chamomile in the garden center, or buy a chamomile tea bag and pour some boiling water on the smell. It's got a lovely appley, pineapple-y, sweet, bitter taste, smell. It's got a very distinctive scent to it, and it's just pure summer for me. It likes full sun. You can grow it from seed, and if you allow it, it'll self-seed happily in a good garden bed. And it really is an annual. I've tried planting it the summer or the fall before to see if I could get a head start on the season. And it survives the winter, but it doesn't really do anything. It just sits there looking a bit sorry for itself. And it didn't get any bigger or wasn't any earlier than the ones I planted in spring. So I tend to buy them as soon as they appear in the garden center in spring, typically February, March, and get them in the ground as early as I possibly can. And I harvest it on a daily basis. So this is true for calendula actually as well. You're only picking the flower. You only want that flower head. Some people will pick the whole plant, but it really, for me, the the medicine is much more intense in the flowers, and different ones come into flower every day. So it's part of my summer ritual. I just go out there every day with a little basket and a pair of scissors, and I snip off the heads. You can also cut back if you're a good gardener, you can cut back to the joint, just so you don't end up with a bunch of sticky bits, which are kind of prone to disease. You can keep doing that, and there'll come a point where the herb just gets exhausted, and will just sort of go mildewy, fall over and die. So at that point, I'll leave some flowers on there and hope that I'll get some self-seeding for the following year. And how I deal with that with tincture is I'll just have a jar with my alcohol in it, and then add my chamomile flowers each day and give it a shake, and just keep topping up with alcohol, just vodka over the top of it. If you're drying, you can just keep adding it to like a new drying rack each day, or a paper bag. A lot of my herbs I just dry in paper bags, poofed out as much as possible with an elastic band, and just hang them up and label. Don't forget to label. So I just harvest them every day until the plant is exhausted. I planted 5 this summer, and I ended up with a very decent amount of tincture indeed. I probably got about 3 or 4 pints, and a little bit of dried herb as well. To grow a ton of dried chamomile, enough for a ton of tea, you would need quite a big patch. But you know, it's a cheap and easy plant to get hold of. So you know, you could totally do that if you have the space to. It's such and you can obviously use the fresh flowers in a tea as well, which is a lovely thing to do in the summertime. And this is the herb that's probably best known for insomnia. It really does help you relax, help you feel calm, reduces anxiety. It's just a lovely relaxing after dinner tea. And it's got these other qualities as well, which are really helpful. Again, particularly as an after dinner tea, it's something we call a carminative. So if you've got the bloat, if you've got gas, you know, that nasty bloated feeling when you've eaten too much, or some people are just prone to it because that's how their digestive system is, in which case they should see a herbalist and see if we can sort it out. But it can really help relieve bloating and gas, digestive gas. And that's true at any age. You know, it's a really great herb to use with babies to help them with colic. Always be careful with the babies. Ask your medical professional. Don't give them a ton of a herb for the first time without kind of seeing how they react to it. But it's something I gave my son from like 2 weeks old. And you can also actually use it sort of topically for babies. I love to make a strong chamomile and lavender tea, which can then just be poured into a baby bath. And babies have got this big surface area and they're quite absorbent. So they'll actually absorb it through their skin, and both the kind of essential oils that are in it and the smell and the fact that it goes through the skin can really help relax them and relieve bloating as well. It's such a nice herb in that way. My teacher used to say that it's the babies of all ages. You know, that red kind of angry fussiness that babies get and that some grown-ups get too. It's a really helpful herb for those kind of states of tension and stressiness and fussiness. And it's all, and that kind of red inflammation as well. It's kind of a good anti-inflammatory. So wonderful herb to have in your thing, in your medicine chest. It's also really good for tension headaches. I mean, like better than you would imagine for such a seemingly gentle and ubiquitous herb. You make a really strong tea, like a tablespoonful of the herb, of the flowers, in a cup of hot water. Leave it for a good 10-15 minutes, strain it off. And if you're getting, you know, those headaches where you get, it's coming from the back of your neck, it's tension in the back of your neck, but it feels like a tight band around here. It's really, often when you've been sitting in a bad position for a long time, or I don't know, spent a whole day working on Zoom, for example, which a lot of us have been doing. It's a really nice thing to take in those circumstances. Just knock back a cup or two of really strong chamomile tea, and it can really help relax and releases the tension and gets rid of the headache. So I mentioned tea there, and of course it's really well known for its wonderful qualities in tea. And if you're buying it, if you're not growing it yet and you're buying it as a tea bag, use 2 tea bags, because if you open up one of those tea bags and see what's inside, it's like a tiny bit of dust, really. You know, you want the quantity of the herb to have the effect. Again, it's a member of that daisy family. So if you are someone who reacts to those that family of plants, and I've got to say, in 20 years of practicing herbal medicine, 4 people maybe I've come across, but it does exist for some people that they don't do well with it. So just be aware of that, and particularly if you're using it with children or young people, just be aware. Just use a tiny bit first and see how someone goes with it before you go nuts with it. But in general, a lovely, safe, and very effective herb, and a real delight to grow in the garden as well, because you get that beautiful daily ritual of going and collecting your chamomile flowers. So delete, there we go. Okay, so cramp bark. It's sometimes called guelder rose, and you sometimes see it sold as a kind of decorative flower. The flowers of it, which have these on the guelder rose, are kind of pale green. But there's another version around these parts, which I have growing in my garden, and which I find is just as effective as the classic cramp bark, and that's snowball bush. And typically, I guess around May, you get these big white round flowers that look like snowballs, sort of hanging off the plant, because it's got narrow stems and they're so big and heavy and beautiful, and they look gorgeous in a vase. So Viburnum opulus is the botanical name for it, and the part, as the name implies, cramp bark, that you use is bark. So basically, I like to, so you do this when the plant is dormant, so late winter or you know, late fall, late fall, early winter, and harvest. It normally needs a trim about that time of year anyway. What you want to do is harvest like 1 to 2 year old branches. You don't want the really thin ones. You're looking for about twice the size of a pen, I guess, around, what would that be? About 1 inch across. Trim them in the way that you should always cut any shrub, and then you can get a potato peeler, because you're just going for the outer bark. You don't want the wood itself in the center, and you'll find when you sit there with your potato peeler, if you slide it along, it comes off beautifully. And it's the medicinal part is actually the sort of inner bark, but I'm calling it the outer bark because it's the whole bark that you use. So if you're very fancy, some people are like really deft with a knife, and they can kind of slice around and down and just peel the whole thing off, but that never works for me. I end up just back with my potato peeler. But it's a really nice way to spend a sunny afternoon in late winter, sitting out on the step and just kind of meditatively kind of preparing your cramp bark. So once you've got all your shavings of the bark, they can then be used to make a tincture. You can dry them and then use them as a decoction. And I've said decoction there because this won't work so well as a tea because it's bark. It kind of will if you do it fresh, but generally with decoctions, you're making them with dried herbs because, you know, that's what you have. With a bark, it's got a lot of tannins, it's hard, it's designed to be sort of tough. So that thing of decocting, cooking the tea, as it were, just to gently break down the fibers and release the medicinal qualities. And I've mentioned their powder and capsules as well. And that's true for most of these herbs. I'm not a massive fan of capsules, but they're an easy and convenient way to take herbs. And if you want to do that yourself, you can dry the herbs and then powder them in a food processor or a pestle and mortar if you're feeling very traditional and witchy about it. And you can then buy empty capsules to fill. It's pretty fiddly, but it's a fun thing to do. Cramp bark, why would you want to do all that hard work? It's very good for muscle cramping. So cramp bark, as the name implies, it's a really good herb for muscle cramping. And for 2 types, both the skeletal muscle cramping, so the kind we get in on our calves or something like that, it can be useful to really release that. But for me, particularly for the smooth muscle, the internal muscle cramping, so we're talking things like menstrual cramps in women, it's particularly good for that. Also for kind of digestive cramping, if you've got a gut that tends towards cramping, it can be really helpful for that as well. And I find adding a little bit of ginger in with it, just a tiny, like 5% ginger tincture, It's really nice. It's a traditional way of doing it. They kind of it moves it to where it needs to be. Ginger stimulates your circulation, so it gets it around your system more quickly. And it can be really, really useful for that. No real contraindications. It's a pretty safe herb in general. Although again, obviously pregnant, nursing, or taking medication, just check. Just in terms of growing it, it's a really beautiful shrub. I mean, it's got these amazing flowers in the summer. You can see from my picture there that the leaves at this time of year turn gorgeous shades of red and deep green. It's very pretty in a vase, and it gives you medicine. So all round fantastic thing to have growing in your garden if you've got space to it. So yeah, definitely a lovely herb to have in your garden. And you know, it's a shrub, so you can kind of build it more into the kind of main landscaping of your garden, rather than necessarily feeling you've got to have it in the kind of vegetable bed, or you know, have space to plant it every year. And it seems to be really, you know, we're all so conscious of the drought, and anyone coming to my garden on Saturday, I apologize in advance for how dried out everything is, but we're balancing the need to keep our plants alive and to conserve water. And for the first few years I lived here, that my cramp got no water whatsoever. And it was an established plant when I moved in. And it seems to care not at all. It seems to be really, really tough. So, so that's cramp bug. Oh, elecampane, God, I love this plant. Again, daisy family. So just to put that out right out there, and you can probably tell from looking at its flower at the top there. This is from pictures I took from herbs in my garden last summer. Inula helenium. So helenium means sun, and it is a member of the sunflower family. And it, as you can see, it looks, I always think it looks like a sunflower that got caught in a fan or something, because it's all kind of ragged around the edges. Sun or part shade, it seems to be happy in both, but you do need a good deep rich soil, because you're growing this for the root. You're not using the upper parts of the plant, you're just using the root. And obviously if you haven't got a nice deep rich soil for it to reach down into, the root's not going to be as big and as juicy as you might hope that it was going to be. Elecampane is a really nice herb for the lungs. It's got a real affinity with the lungs, and I use it a lot for people with asthma, congested lungs. So like if you've had a cold or flu or COVID or whatever, and you've got those kind of coughing, congested lungs, it's quite heating and it's quite moving. So it doesn't work so well on a dry cough. It's more for a kind of productive phlegm on the chest kind of situation. But that said, it is actually very helpful, along with some other herbs, like licorice and so on, for herb lungs that have been affected by smoky air, which again is, you know, something that we've been suffering with a lot, because it again helps to move everything and helps to kind of shift it all out, which is what you want, rather than it just sitting there. It's also used for an inflamed digestive system. It's very mucilaginous. So if you had that root right now, if I had it right now and chopped it up and smushed it, you would see it's quite slimy. And that mucilage is part of what helps the lungs to, that loosens everything in the lungs. It also is a very good source of something called inulin, and you'll notice there in the name, inula helenium. Inulin is named for this particular plant, although it's found in quite a few different roots. And it's a very good prebiotic. So it's not a probiotic, as it's not bacteria, but it's something that feeds bacteria. And I'm sure some of you are aware of all the research that's going on around our gut microbiome and the importance of a healthy balance of bacteria in our gut for all kinds of things to do with our health, from our mental health through to obviously our digestion, joints, you name it. It seems to have an association with a lot of things, and it's an area I'm particularly interested in. And it's still very much a lot of research going on in that area at the moment. But something that is established is that having a diet that's rich in prebiotics will help the bacteria to maintain a good balance in your gut. And so making sure you're getting some inulin into your diet is a good thing to do. And there is quite a lot of inulin in elecampane. So it's got a really nice use from that point of view. I'll throw in a little anecdote here quickly as well, which I really enjoy. I'm really interested in the kind of traditional uses of herbs and the folklore around herbs in Europe, which is obviously where I'm from. And another name for elecampane is elfwort. And you might know that wort means plant in Anglo-Saxon, and it's elf plant. And there was an idea in the Middle Ages that you could get shot by an elf, and you could suffer from a condition called elf shot. It typically would happen because you had accidentally stepped on an elf who were invisible, or knocked over his home or whatever. And he would get his bow and arrow and he would fire an arrow at you and you would get sick. And you would have what I guess we'd now call kind of a malaise. No visible wound, no rash, no obvious illness, but obviously unwell, and you could even die of it if you weren't careful. So elfwort was used to treat elf shot. And I find that really interesting because you think about kind of some of the wasting diseases that will cause chest problems that again are kind of aren't visible, like TB. If you think about things to do with the gut microbiome and that affecting the health. So it's really interesting. I love these kind of old-fashioned explanations for why certain herbs do certain things. And for me, they're alive because they're a different way of describing the same thing, using different images, different ideas that are specific to that time and place. You know, I suspect people in medieval times found it easier to believe in elves than they did that there was this massive population of bacteria living in our guts, busy doing their own thing, having their own life cycles, digesting our food for us. It's not us who do it, it's the bacteria in there. So, you know, we all have our different ways of describing things, and we know the science is right. Of course, I'm not saying there are elves, but I enjoy the fact that what we can sometimes dismiss as folklore is actually often an attempt to describe something that we can recognize in modern science, if that makes sense. Total diversion from the 10 herbs there, but I'm always fascinated by that stuff. We can move on to the next one, Delise. Thank you. Oh my gosh, lemon balm. I had a clinic and apothecary in London for a long time, or several years anyway, and it was called Lemon Balm. And my email address is lemonbalmonline@mac.com. It's my absolute top favorite herb, and I grow lots and lots of it. It's all looking, again, very sad at this time in the year, but luckily I've made lots of medicine with it already. If you've got it growing in your garden, you will know that it's an absolutely totally so sorry, I just noticed there's a typo on this slide. Something popped up. It says contraindications hyperthyroid, and it should say hypothyroid. So I'm going to ask, I'll make sure that's corrected before this goes out. And oh, look at that, as if by magic. Ta-da! So lemon balm, what does it do? Well, it is, let's start with the thyroid because that is a good point. It can really help people with an overactive thyroid gland to reduce their thyroid action. I use it in combination with other herbs, typically lycopus and leonorus, which is motherwort. But the hypothyroid isn't something you should really be treating yourself at home. It is really dangerous if you have an uncontrolled overactive thyroid. So you do need to seek medical advice on that. But I often work with people alongside their doctors and medication they're taking, and it can be really helpful in those circumstances. And for that reason, it is contraindicated if you've got an underactive thyroid, because you don't want to suppress your thyroid function even further, obviously. So that's kind of quite a medical side to what lemon balm does. On a more energetic side, it's just the most uplifting herb. It's not sedative at all, really. But instead, it has this wonderful uplifting ability. I almost feel like it lifts you above your anxiety or your stress or your insomnia. It just makes you feel happier and better. I often will serve some lemon balm tincture, which tastes lovely, by the way. It's got a really lovely, that light, slightly musky, lemony fragrance that lemon balm has at the beginning of a party, because it really kind of gets everyone chatting and laughing and talking. It's just very cheering and very uplifting. It's also used as a kind of digestive support. So again, if your digestion feels good, you tend to feel better. And it's a member of the mint family. If you look at it there, you can see how very similar it looks to mint. And all the mint plants have this ability to kind of settle indigestion, settle a kind of gassy or uncomfortable, nauseous stomach. They can kind of calm it down. And it's really useful for doing that. And if you have it in your garden, you'll know it'll just keep self-seeding and coming back. It's super tough, super resilient. You can propagate it. Either it'll do it itself through its seeds, but also it like a mint, it spreads along the ground. It spreads through its roots. So it's very easy then to just kind of dig up bits of it and put them in pots and give them to people as little gifts. I gave it to a whole class full of 5th graders once who right at the beginning of the pandemic actually so they could make their own lemon balm tea at home. And it does look a lot like mint. If you look at the picture there, you'll notice there's two very easy ways to distinguish mint from lemon balm. One is obviously the smell. It smells lemony, whereas mint tends to smell minty unless you've got lemon mint. But even that is more minty. Lemon balm has a very distinctively musky, lemony fragrance to it. The other is if you look at, and I'm always really bad, I've studied botany, but I'm rubbish on the names of different bits. But if you look at the edges of the leaves there, you will see, oh, I'm so sorry. Hold on. Should have turned off my notifications, shouldn't I? If you look on the edges of the leaves there, you'll see, can you see they're scalloped? They're round and smooth, whereas on a mint leaf, they're pointy and jagged. So that's a really easy way to tell the difference in a picture like this. It's got that rounded, soft, scalloped edges to it. And it's also much more kind of triangular shaped. It's wider at the bottom and narrower at the top, more sort of like a sort of spoon shape, not spoon, but more like an arrow shape, whereas the mint leaf is a more classically shaped leaf that sort of comes out and goes up into a point. But smell is always the best way to identify it. And it's not a herb you'll mix up with anything else because it does have that distinctive smell. And I mentioned there as well cognitive support. Traditionally, it's been seen as helpful to improve cognition, particularly in later life, and to protect cognitive function. So there's been some research done on this. I wouldn't say it's exactly conclusive, but it's definitely one that I tend to use quite a lot with older people, partly because it has got this possibly some use for protecting your cognitive function, and also for that uplifting thing. I think at that point in life, a lot of people need some lightness and some uplift in their life, and it can be really helpful for that as well, and for anxiety, which can increase with age as well. But honestly, I give it to people of all ages. I just love this herb, and I probably take it most days myself. I just really enjoy being around lemon balm. And it's an exception. I mentioned earlier that normally you will make your tinctures by putting your plant material and alcohol and stashing it away for 2 weeks, normally somewhere cool and dark. With lemon balm, without getting kind of too heavily into the constituents in the plant, like any mint family, it's got quite a lot of tannins in the leaf. That's the black floaty stuff you see on a cup of black tea that you've let brew for too long. And you kind of don't want the tannins out of this plant. What you want is the essential oils, that light, fragrant lemoniness. So I don't feel the need to make my tincture for like 2 weeks. I do it for a much shorter period of time. I put my vodka and my lemon balm into a mason jar, screw the lid on tight, stick it on my sunny wall for 2 days, maybe even 1 day if it's very hot, and just let the heat from the sun gently warm the vodka. And because those volatile oils, those essential oils, evaporate at a much lower temperature than water, for example, they will just gently kind of drift out into the alcohol, and I can strain it out and I end up with a beautiful golden colored, deeply fragrant tincture that's very light and very easy to use, very nice, good in cocktails. And so I do that. I call it a sun tincture, and I've been doing that for a long time. And I love to make my lemon balm tincture in that way. Next up, we have I didn't put a picture of rosemary in. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, everybody. I will. That's not something that Denise can do through the magic of her magic, but I think you probably all know what rosemary looks like. This is a picture of sage, which we will talk about later. But you are, of all the herbs here, probably you're very, very familiar with seeing rosemary around town. So rosemary is such a great herb to have growing. It's not only super hardy and resilient. I mean, as you know, it's happy in full sun. You can grow it as a hedge around these plants. It's super easy, and oh my goodness, you're amazing. She's incredible. Look at that. Whoa, this is magical. It flowers in winter as well. Don't you love that? I love to see kind of the bees and things that, you know, in the middle of winter when there's not a lot of flowers around, there they are blossoming away. So it's a very good thing to grow. It's super hardy and super kind of tolerant. And it's one that you can use, again, both internally and externally. So internally, it's really good for headaches, and it's got a traditional use of this. There's an association between rosemary and memory, and all the energy being in the head kind of thing. So it relieves headaches, but it also really helps with your concentration and your energy levels. And Shakespeare, I can't remember the precise quote, but Shakespeare talks about rosemary for memory. And it's often planted in remembrance of people as well. There's this idea of rosemary for remembrance. And you can use both the herb itself and also the essential oil for this. When my son was little, we used to walk into school past a bunch of rosemary at his school Life Lab garden. And I would often get him to pick a little piece of rosemary and pop it in his pocket, just to sniff through the day, just to help his focus. It's got a really nice ability to do that. It's also an excellent antimicrobial. And in fact, you will, if you look on the packaging of natural foods that have got natural food preservatives in them, you might see rosmarin is one of the names for it. There's an extract of rosemary that's used as a natural food preservative. It's got a really, really good antimicrobial action. And I use it. So for example, I make a first aid salve, which is basically extra virgin olive oil with a few herbs, which rosemary, calendula, yarrow, and plantain. And the rosemary in particular is in there to really reduce the chance of infection, and it really kind of can protect against that. Really good antimicrobial. It's also good anti-inflammatory as well, which is really helpful in those circumstances. And I make that just by making an infused oil of the rosemary. And I use that for a hand salve as well, which is really nice too. So it's got this stimulant, concentration, energy aspect, and then it's got this antimicrobial aspect as well. It's okay in a tea. I tend to find it a little bit much in a tea. It's quite strong, but it's a heck of a punch if you really need to sort of a pick me up, and a kind of mild tea of rosemary can be really good. Tincture works really well. And then, as I say, an infused oil with, again, a little bit of heat just to pull out the constituents, because again, it's quite a resinous plant. You can smell how resiny it is, just to use for the topical purpose there. Because it is quite stimulant. We avoid using it for people who've got high blood pressure, internally at any rate, because it can push the blood pressure up a little bit. If you've got normal blood pressure, it's not going to push your blood pressure up to dangerous levels, but it has got that stimulant action to it. But I would say no more than caffeine, for example, and it comes without some of the other issues that can come with caffeine. It's just got that a kind of milder action as well. So a really nice herb to include in your garden. And you know, this is one I haven't even tried. There's some kind of folk methods of doing an essential oil, which involve, if you Google them, or I think they're in one of my books actually. I think there's one in the adaptogens book. And basically you get a ton of plant and a big pot, like a pot on your stovetop, and you can put water around the edge and then push steam up to you. Basically balance, it's hard to describe it without showing you, but you balance a bowl, and then you put the lid on upside down and you put ice in the lid. So basically what you're doing is you're cooking the herb, and very gently, so the steam comes up, and then you're using the lid covered in ice to condense the essential oil as it comes off, and that then drops down into a bowl. And you won't get an essential oil, but you will get a floral water, or sometimes called a hydrosol. And you're probably familiar with lavender water. You can do this with lavender as well. But that works really well with rosemary, and you can take that internally as well as using it externally. And it's really nice on the skin because, again, it's got that antimicrobial quality. So it's nice for things like acne, as a kind of like a spritz. And it's just, again, to wake you up and make you feel more kind of enlivened. So there's lots you can do with rosemary. Thank you. There's the sage. So garden sage, yes, a really nice herb to grow in your garden. Now, I have to be honest, I don't always find that easy to grow here. It's a Mediterranean herb. It should love our Mediterranean climate. It should be hardy. It should not care that it gets dry. But I do find that when I plant sage here, it can be a little bit delicate and a little bit tender. And I don't know why. I don't know if that's just me or whether other people are having similar problems. I know it grows very well in the farm and garden. There's plenty of it up in the farm and garden. So maybe I'm just smothering it with kindness, and maybe I'm being too attentive. Maybe I just need to let it be. I'm talking here about Salvia officinalis. So that's the classic garden sage. You could also white sage. There's a whole bunch of other sages, not like the pineapple sage or the hummingbird sage, the ones that have very different leaves, but the ones that are more like the kind of garden sage tend to have similar medicinal properties. But because it's the one that's traditionally used, I tend to use Salvia officinalis whenever I can. And you're just using the leaves. You can see that this is a purple sage, and it's purple sage after rain. So it's got some really kind of pretty little jewel-like drops of water on it. I find it is better in a little bit of partial shade. It should do well in hot sun, but it doesn't for me for some reason. You can try growing it from seed, or you can easily pick some up at the garden centre pretty much year round. Really interestingly, if you make a tea from the fresh herb or the dried herb, but I prefer it from the fresh if I can, it has two different opposite actions, whether it's hot or cold. So you always make the tea with hot water because obviously it won't work. You need the heat to break down the cell walls and release the constituents of the herb. However, if you make it hot and then drink it immediately, it has quite a heating action in the body, which kind of makes sense when you have anything hot. It's going to have a somewhat heating effect, but it really is quite heating. But if you then allow that tea to get cold and just leave it cold or put it in the refrigerator, it has a cooling, drying effect. And that is really, really helpful for people who are going through menopause and are going through those hot flashes. And people can get hot flashes at other times of life as well, for various reasons. Drugs and so forth, kind of medications can cause that. So it's really helpful as a cold sage tea for those menopausal hot flashes. Also for people who are just generally hot, or tend towards excessive perspiration when they're anxious. It's got a drying, cooling effect on it if you take it as cold tea. And I find it can be really helpful and really effective. And it can really, I treat obviously a lot of women during menopause. And there's a lot you can do during that period to kind of balance hormones and things, but as a kind of great sticking plaster, just to make the hot flashes less unpleasant. Some cold sage tea is a really nice herb to use at that point. And then as a hot tea, especially with some honey stirred into it, again, it's got that really antimicrobial quality. So it's very soothing on the throat. And when you're going down with a cold or flu and you've got that really sore throat, or if you've got strep throat, that kind of circumstance, you're almost using it topically on the throat, just warm sage tea with a little bit of honey in it, just to kind of soothe, and again, to sweeten it, because sage tea isn't the best flavor. It can be really, really helpful. Two things to be aware of. One, it dries up breast milk. So it's used actually to do that deliberately when a person is ready to wean their child and they've been nursing. It can be really useful to kind of ease it up. But for that reason, obviously, you don't want to use it if you're intending to nurse. It also, I should mention here, is somewhat estrogenic. So it's not a herb you would want to use in large quantities if you have, for example, an estrogenic cancer. breast cancer, uterine cancer, etc., ovarian cancer. But those situations come under what I'm saying around, you know, if you have a condition, you do want to check in with a herbalist. And it's not super estrogenic, but just be a little bit aware of that. You're going to be fine with it in food and things like that, and the occasional cup of tea, but you wouldn't want to take too much of it. It's also a gentle adaptogen, and I mentioned previously about adaptogens being these herbs which have help the body to deal with the effects of stress. And sage isn't one that's classically classed as an adaptogen, but I was trained that way, and I think for me it does. A lot of them are roots. You know, the most famous would be ginseng, and they have this kind of stimulant qualities to them. But garden sage is a just nice, gentle herb with adaptogenic tendencies, let's put it like that. Just kind of a little bit of a kind of protector for the whole body. And again, it's got that association with kind of maintaining memory going into older age. You know, there's a old-fashioned phrase for an elder person, which is a sage. And it kind of comes from that similar idea that sage has this association with age and wisdom and maturity. But you can certainly use it for all ages. It's a great herb. And one that if you can grow tons of it, let me know and I'll come around and harvest some, because I'm still working on getting it established. Let's go on to our next herb. And we've got 2 more herbs, so I'll get through these just so that we can have time for our question and answer session. Valerian, you probably know this. This is one herb you may well have used if you suffer from insomnia. 2 things to note here. One is that botanical name, Valeriana officinalis. The really cool or annoying, depending on your attitude, pink, red kind of flowers that you've got around your garden, that you think of as valerian, with the fleshy stems and the kind of smooth, rounded, bright green leaves, are not valerian. They're red valerian. It's a different, slightly different family. It's related, but it's not the same, and they don't have the same quality to the same degree. Valerian is the closest we have as herbalists to a genuine kind of sedative. It will knock you out somewhat, which can be really helpful if you're suffering from severe insomnia, very stressed out, very anxious, and also for pain. It's the roots that are used, and roots are harvested in the fall or winter. What I would say about harvesting roots is make sure I don't cut the plant back and then harvest the root. I leave the dead bit of the plant as it dies back, because I want to be absolutely sure that the root I'm harvesting was previously attached to that plant, because you're waiting for the plant to put all that energy back down into the root in the fall. But you don't then want to accidentally dig up the wrong thing and tincture it, and roots can look awfully similar. You probably won't mistake it with valerian, because if you've ever smelled valerian root, it's an extremely distinctive smell that's quite reminiscent of kind of old socks. It's really powerful. And one of the reasons why I haven't put down as a preparation tea, because for me, valerian tea would just be like, whoa. But it's very effective as a tincture, and it does work well as a powder or in capsules. You'll find it in tablets and things like calms as well. It grows really well here, sun or shade. It does need some moistness, and again, it wants that deeper, richer soil so that it can put its roots down. Mine has seeded like mad this summer, so I've just sort of left it there, and I'm hoping I'm going to get lots of babies next year. Contraindications, that can be too heating for some people. It is quite heating. So again, if someone's waking up with night sweats, particularly during menopause, for example, it can be too heating and it can actually exacerbate it. And the other thing that can happen with valerian in a small percentage of people is it can be quite stimulant. It can actually have the opposite effect. So if you've never taken valerian before and you're going to be trying it out for the first time, just try a little bit and see what it does for you. And you might even find it changes through life. When I was young, valerian was quite stimulant for me. And now that I'm older, shall we say, I find that it really, it works brilliantly. I don't have that problem anymore. It knocks me out if I need knocking out, and really helps with the pain if I have pain. So yeah, really, and it's a really worthwhile herb to grow, and definitely I would recommend in your gardens in Santa Cruz, because it's pretty easy to grow. And a nice addition. And last of all, yarrow. So you can grow this in the garden. You can also find it growing all over the place. You know, it's a native herb. It's a really useful one to include in your herb garden or to harvest outside in the wide world as well. It likes full sun. You can grow from seed or starts, and you want the white flowered type. If you go to any of the garden centers where you're going to get an amazing discount for your membership of CSFS, you will see that they've got really pretty ones called things like Sunset, and they're pink and orange and gorgeous. And I don't think they have quite the same medicinal quality. They've been grown for the pretty colors, not for the hardcore medicinal qualities. And so what do I use it for? It's a styptic. It stops bleeding. So it's useful for heavy menstrual bleeding and just bleeding in general. You can make a spit poultice of it. I've said it stops bleeding externally there. You can pick some if you're out on a hike or something and you get an insect bite, or you get a little cut or graze, chew it up and then squidge that wodge of squished up, or you can just squish it between your fingers, put it on there, and it'll take out the pain and the inflammation and soothe it, stop it bleeding, and just bring it back. I've seen it work so well on bee stings, for example. It's really, really useful thing to have. You can also use it internally. It's a stimulant for the venous system, so it's good for anyone who suffers from sluggish veins, so things like varicose veins. It's not going to make them go away, but it can help prevent them from coming back. And you'd use it topically for that and internally at the same time. So I rather gabbled through that last one because I really do want to make sure we've got time for questions. So if we can skip on to the next slide, which is Q&As. And I think we're going to have a minute or so at the end just for me to tell you where you can get things. But if we don't, then you can just check back on the slide or on the recording.
Thank you, Paula. That was incredible, and it elicited a lot of questions. So let me get you started on those. First of all, I have to know, what tea are you drinking?
Oh, I am drinking. I'm drinking a combination of fennel, nettle, and calendula. So it's kind of like a cleansing type thing.
Practices what she preaches. Great.
I always have a herb tea on the go.
This has been wonderful. And before we lose people's attention, I want to make sure that everybody knows we are always looking to improve. We want to know how things are going for you and what kind of topics you'd like to see. So in the chat, Vanessa is going to put a link to a little form that gives you the opportunity to give us feedback. So there's that. And here's questions. Let's do them in order. Do you ever freeze herbs as ice cubes or as a paste?
Yes, it's a brilliant idea. All these traditional ways of preparing herbs, freezers are great. So yes, I do. I would say add some water or some oil or something generally. It depends on the herb, but yes, definitely. Freezing's great.
Okay. Someone wants to know if Chinese herbs and pills are ground up herbs or are those evaporated decoctions?
It depends on the herb. So it depends, like when you get medicinal mushrooms, it's hard to break down the cell wall, so it has to be decocted. But yeah, I think it depends on the herb with Chinese medicine. Great.
I certainly want to know, as do others, where do you find that 95% alcohol in town?
If you go to some of the liquor stores, they on the you save on Mission. I'm probably going to get them in trouble now and they won't be able to sell it anymore. But on the bottom shelf on the far right hand side, next to the Everclear, there's I can't remember what it's called, but it's kind of in Polish and it's 95%. You can buy it from commercial suppliers as well, but you generally have to buy it by the gallon. And 95% alcohol is basically a bomb. So I don't want it in my house or anywhere where there's a fire type, risk. So I just buy little bottles. It's expensive. It's about $35 for a bottle, but you don't use a huge amount of it, or I don't anyway.
Good point. Okay. So there was a question. I'm not sure I understood it properly, but I think somebody wants to know if calendula steeped in coconut oil is good for healthy gums and oral tissues. And do you recommend swallowing or spitting after pulling teeth? I think that's what that meant.
So I would spit because I think you're gathering all the the icky bacteria, so you don't necessarily want them inside you, so spit it out. And yeah, coconut oil would work well. You just need to make sure you warm the coconut oil quite gently. It's a little bit fragile, coconut oil, I always feel. And I love it. I make lots of skincare things out of it. But yeah, and it's, you know, it's really good antifungal and antimicrobial just in itself. So yeah, just be gentle in the heating of it.
Okay. Someone who's obviously a gardener wants to know if deer and rabbits eat these plants.
I've got a ton of rabbits hanging out in my garden at the moment. I don't really get deer. You know, it depends on the plant and the stage of the plant's life. You know, I think a baby rosemary might get nibbled at, whereas a full-grown one probably isn't going to be that appealing. Native things like cow poppy, probably not so much. They tend to leave those alone a little bit more. But yeah, it depends on the plant, really.
Yes, and I teach a class in vertebrate pests, and deer tend to not love the strong herbal aromas. They might nibble it, but they tend to leave it alone. Yeah.
Yeah.
Bunnies, can't vouch for them. They'll probably eat anything. People want to know what kind of quantities you need to feel the benefits. What's the ratio of herb to water? And you spoke to this a little bit, but for a tea or a tincture, can you give us a ballpark?
So a typical dose of tincture would be, I actually, again, use slightly different to a lot of American herbalists. They tend to use like a dropper full or something. I feel like you need a certain amount of the herb to have an effect. So I will typically blend 4 to 5 herbs together and give someone a teaspoonful of that 2 or 3 times a day. It kind of depends what you're doing. You know, if you're going down with a cold and you're taking echinacea, you need quite a lot. If you're dealing with a kind of ongoing issue, sort of support, you probably need to use less. But we're talking in that region of 1/2 to 2 teaspoonfuls of tincture, 1 to 3 times a day. With teas, at least a teaspoonful of the herb, 1 to 2 teaspoonfuls of the herb for a cup like that of hot water.
Or you can consult an herbalist, I bet.
Or you can also consult a herbalist. Yeah, I've heard there's some around here.
Okay. Someone thought it was illegal to pick California poppies, and that could be, I remember that from Girl Scouts.
Yeah, did I not say
grow them in your backyard, right?
Yeah, exactly. If they're growing in your backyard, you can pick them. If they're growing out on Pogonip or Wild Ranch or something, you absolutely emphatically cannot. So yeah, just like I thought I said that, but yeah, if it's growing in your yard or someone else's, you can pick them. It's my understanding.
Okay.
I had a friend this summer who was pulling them out because they were just taken over her vegetable bed. So I just went down there with a couple of bags and brought them back up the hill.
They can be invasive. It's true. So flowers, when you say flowers, does that mean petal, the entirety of the flower? Does it include the seeds, the top of the stem? Can you give us guidance there?
Yeah, sure. So particularly there, I was talking about calendula and chamomile, and in both of those cases, it's just the flower head, but including the center bit. As far as seeds go, I would pick them before they go to seed. You really want to get them when they're in full bloom.
Someone wanted to know about pineapple weed, which I asked the name. It's Matriarcharia discoidea.
Yeah.
Is that as effective as chamomile?
It's not as effective as a sedative, but it's great fun, and it feels like it's quite fashionable at the moment. A lot of people are talking about it. It's like this little kind of chamomile that grows on paths. You'll see it if you walk on well-worn paths. It will pop up on those kind of places where nothing else is growing. And if you squish the flower head, it smells of pineapple, and it's like a center of a chamomile flower without the petals rayed around it. Really nice. It's not a book I've recommended, but in my list here, but there's a wonderful book called Forage by Liz Knight. It came out, who's an English forager, came out earlier this year. It's not medicinal, which is why I didn't include it, but it's got great recipes for pineapple weed foraged kind of cookies and things like that. Really nice one to have, but it doesn't really have that sedative or that relaxing quality in quite the same way as German chamomile, to answer the actual question.
Okay, good segue. Why is German chamomile the preferred variety? Do we know why?
It's the one that's traditionally used. It's less, Roman chamomile is quite powerful and quite punchy, and quite resinous, and just doesn't seem to have that same relaxing quality to it.
Is cramp bark a blood thinner?
No. I see why you're asking that, because salicylates tend to be in barks like willow bark, for example. But actually the salicylates, they seem to have the pain-killing action when they're taken as whole herbs, but they don't have that blood thinning action in the same way.
Okay. Does
But if you're on blood thinners, always check with your doctor before you take herbs, just to say that.
Well said. Does a decoction always use water? Simmer in water for how long? Then strain and bottle and keep in the fridge? Question mark.
Good
More on
questions.
decoction.
So decoction, the time it takes is going to depend what you're decocting. If I'm decocting dried cramp bark, for example, or licorice, dried licorice root, really kind of fibrous, it's going to take a lot longer than if I'm doing fennel seeds or something like that are quite light and quite easy. So really you want to do it until whatever you're decocting, or dried berries like elderberries or something. Do it until, so bring it up to heat, so just bubbling, and then you want to lower the heat right down. You can cover it if you want to, and just let it gently simmer until whatever it is you're decocting is mushy. So you want it to be mushy, so you know that it's completely absorbed the water, and that it's given everything out. And you can give it a squish around just to kind of get stuff out. And at that point you can strain it out and then reduce it if you want. You can drink it straight out as it is, or if you want to preserve it, you can reduce it down. And either keep it in the fridge. It won't, water things, even decocted, won't keep for more than a couple of days in the fridge, but you could freeze it. You could even like reduce it down to a quarter or something, and then freeze that as ice cubes and put 1 or 2 in a cup and add hot water to make an instant kind of decocted tea. Lots of things. Or you can add the honey and sugar and make a syrup out of it, and that'll keep in the fridge 3 weeks.
Popsicles. Sounds great. Is elecampane safe for a 2-year-old?
Yes, it might be it depends. You'd have to think about how you got it into the 2-year-old. A lot of people wouldn't feel comfortable giving a 2-year-old tincture, and it's pretty bitter. I mean, it's significantly bitter. So it would probably be hard to get them to take it as a tea or a decoction. You could decoct it and make a syrup with it, with a little bit of honey as well. I would also be curious why you were giving it to the 2-year-old. If they've got a kind of ongoing chesty cough, I think a campaign might be a bit strong, and I might be going for something like a little bit of licorice. Making a little syrup out of licorice, or depends what's going on for the 2-year-old. I think with, it's quite young, so you might want to have a chat with a herbalist, and I'm happy to answer any questions you've got if you contact me afterwards.
Lemon balm good for aromatherapy?
Yes, it is. So the essential oil of lemon balm is one of the most expensive ones, even though it's high. It has a lot of essential oil in it. You need an awful lot of lemon balm to make it, so it's extremely expensive. But yeah, it's lovely for aromatherapy. That's not a thing I'm skilled in or trained in, but I like smelling nice things, and I'm very respectful of the power that aromatherapy can have. And it's a lovely essential oil. Also, it's a really good, I forgot to say this, it's a really good antiviral. So the essential oil can also be used on cold sores and other herpes sores to reduce the effect of the virus. And it's useful to take it internally as an antiviral as well. Not the essential oil, the tea or the tincture.
Okay, how long do dried herbs last and retain their potency, and do tinctures and oils and powders expire likewise?
Great question. Dried herbs it'll depend what it is and how well you look after it. If it's in a airtight, dark jar, in a cool place where it's very protected from heat and sun and temperature fluctuation, a dried herb could keep for years. And again, like say if it's dried rosemary or something, it's going to keep for a really long time. They found resin, myrrh resin in Tutankhamun's tomb, which was still active after 4,000 years. So, you know, it depends on the conditions. If you keep your calendula flowers in a clear glass jar on your kitchen shelf because they look pretty, they'll last a couple of months. They won't go off, but they'll lose some of their medicinal quality. Obviously, any water, if you keep it somewhere steamy, it's going to go off because it gets damp. But as long as you keep it dry, it'll keep, but it will lose some of its medicinal benefit over time. Tinctures keep for years typically, as long as you really strain them out well. So you're using 2 layers of cheesecloth or something to make sure there's no organic material in there, because if there is, it's going to go off, obviously. And oils, yeah, oils, a lot of that's down to the base oil that you use and how volatile that is. Some oils have a tendency to go rancid quite quickly. So I find grapeseed oil doesn't keep well. So I don't use that a lot. Extra virgin olive oil has pretty good keeping qualities.
Okay,
And, sorry, just one thing to add to that: smell and taste, but first, and look, eyes and nose, you know, are the key thing. Does it smell good? Does it smell mildewy or moldy? Does it smell fresh? Does it smell of the plant? And does it retain the colors? Because a lot of the medicinal qualities are in the flavonoids, the pigments, so it should maintain the color. Sorry, Delise.
A great tip. Does rosemary need to be dried to make tea out of it?
Nope, you can do it fresh.
Does white sage have the same characteristics as Salvia officinalis? Are there any special attributes to the sacred white sage?
Well, the white sage is considered sacred and does have those kind of very kind of religious almost tradition. So I would say that garden sage doesn't really carry with it that same, I mean, it's very highly loved and respected herb in Europe, but it doesn't carry that kind of weight of tradition with it. In terms of constituents, white sage is stronger, I would say, than garden sage. It could certainly be used in similar ways. Something to bear in mind with white sage is that is one you definitely, again, would not harvest from the wild because it is threatened in the wild. And
okay.
You know, there's some kind of cultural issues around its use as well.
Okay. Last one, it might be a long answer and we have a few slides to go through and we're running over. So quickly, can you comment on the possibility of giving valerian to your dog? Dose.
It is illegal to treat animals with herbs, and you can only medicinally treat an animal if you are a qualified veterinarian. That said, there's several books out there, so I would not feel comfortable giving advice on that. And animals have very different metabolisms than us. So, for example, you should never use essential oils on your animal, despite what some companies suggest, because they can be really toxic, particularly to cats, but also to dogs. And so I would say refer to a really good book. There's several books out there on veterinary herbal medicine. Also, I know that valerian, cats go berserk for valerian. It has the same effect on them as catnip, which is highly stimulant, completely bonkers, crazy, running around the room and going whatever. And actually, when they've done studies, it would appear that those herbs have almost like an LSD acid type effect on cats' brains. So don't assume that because it does one thing in one species, it's going to do the same thing in different species, and you probably wouldn't want that in your dog. So yeah, I would check with the veterinarian is the answer.
Poor kitties. Okay, that was a great lightning round. Give me a few minutes here to talk about what's coming up in terms of workshops. September 26th, I'm afraid it's sold out. I should have said that. We're offering a hands-on floral design workshop up at the farm. It's a UPIC thing. It's a wonderful thing. Maybe we'll get to do it again, but sorry to say, that one is sold out. And then Paula is going to walk members only. This is another reason to join the Friends of the Farm and Garden. It's a members only event. It's a private herb walk, also sold out.
Is that on the 29th or is it this Saturday? I thought it was this Saturday.
It is a good question that I will get back to you on.
Possible that I got that wrong. It's more than possible. It's fine either way.
Okay, no, I think you are correct. But let me double check that. We've resumed guided tours of the farm and garden. And so the first one that we're going to have since COVID broke out, October 3rd. And the farm is open for anybody that wants to just stroll about during the daylight hours. In November, we're going to have a wonderful Grow Great Garlic class. There's some tips and tricks to growing garlic properly, and we'll actually have some garlic seed garlic to sell as part of that. It'll be a virtual class, but you can sign up for the garlic if you want to plant some. In October, we're working on a few things. We're hoping that in October we can get a panel of different herbalists to talk about making herbal gifts and herbal things from the garden. So everybody gets a few minutes to talk and demonstrate, and we walk away with some techniques. And then Oren does a great browsing seed catalogs, Oren Martin from the Chadwick Garden, and that we're hoping he'll show up for that one. And in January, we're expecting a soil management class, which we get requests for that every time we teach. So with that, I'm going to let Paula speak to the resources that she's offered us.
Okay, so just a few here that are some of my favorite ones, and I've missed out my absolute favorite one actually, which was very remiss of me. So let's start with number one, which is the Herb Room in Santa Cruz. Brilliant resource for, I didn't put it in here because it's not really about gardening, but if you want to go and buy herbs, please support the Herb Room down on Mission and Laurel because it's awesome. And because I just love having that resource there, and I think it's like use it or lose it. So that the reason I didn't put it in there is it's just for dried herbs really. But Mountain Rose Herbs is a good source of herbs. They also sell seeds and so on as well. You can also get packaging there because part of the fun of all this is the nice packaging. So you can get little dropper bottles and you can get all those kind of things as well. Strictly Medicinal Herbs is awesome for a massive range of medicinal, not just seeds, but they also do little starts as well, which you get through the mail, and they're really worth supporting, and just a really good resource for those more obscure. If you really get into growing a good herb garden, you can get some more obscure things through them. And then both the Garden Company on Mission Street and San Lorenzo Garden Center down on River have really good herbal sections. Particularly down at San Lorenzo Garden Center, they really rocked it this summer. They had some things that I was not expecting to see there, including a ton of gumweed and some really interesting baby herbs, that a lot of which have ended up back in my garden. And they've got some pretty knowledgeable people both down there and at the Garden Company. So again, we've got this fabulous resource of our local garden centers, so it's great to support them. And I know that both of them as well, if you want something in particular, they'll order it in for you. So shop local. And then, yeah, the Herb Room on Mission is my other key one. There's also, it's worth saying also in the farmers markets in springtime, there's some good herb growers around here. Steadfast, Kindred, Blossom Farm, who have baby medicinal plants for sale as well.
I just want to confirm that your herb walk, for anyone who signed up for it, is this coming Saturday. So you'll get an email about that.
25th. So this is just a quick snapshot of some of the favorite books in my kitchen. The Holistic Herbal by David Hoffman it's just really good because it's very clear. It's got more depth if you're interested in the chemistry and the pharmacology behind the whole thing. But it also has really nice kind of monographs of each of the key medicinal herbs. Essential Book of Herbal Medicine. Simon Mills is a very famous herbalist who's written a lot of textbooks. This is one of his older books, but I like it. It's really readable. He's got a nice style, and it again kind of talks about both the science. You can go into it at a deeper level, or you can just flick through and find the different herbs. The Herbal Book of Making and Taking is not one you will find on the bookshelves, but you can buy it online. You can definitely get it on Amazon. I think you can get it from other online resources, and you could ask Bookshop to order it in for you. This was written by my teacher, Christopher Headley, who was one of the key lecturers at the University of Westminster. He sadly passed away a couple of years ago, but he's awesome, and I love this book dearly. And then A Modern Herbal by Mrs. M. Grieve. This is the woman who basically kept English herbal medicine going through the 2 world wars, or certainly through the Second World War, going around and collecting all of this sort of knowledge and tradition, and it's got folklore in it, and it's got recipes in it, and it's just fabulous. It comes in 2 volumes because there's so much of it, and it's up there in the top right, and a wonderful thing if you're interested, particularly in that British tradition of herbal medicine. And then peeking in on the corner there on the bottom right is Infuse, which is the book I wrote along with, well, actually the other person, Karen Sullivan, ended up having to do something else, which is why I ended up doing it. So it's mostly me, and that's herb teas, herbal teas to cleanse, nourish, and heal. And it's got lots of herbal tea recipes in it, and little monographs on lots of the different herbs. And then not pictured there, but there's another one by me if you search my name, called Adaptogens, which is about adaptogens, and it's got a lot of recipes for using herbs as food, or incorporating them into your food, if you like. And then if you want to know more, or you want to get in contact, I do a lot of classes and things. I tend to post information about them on Instagram and Facebook, because I found that's easier and more effective than putting them onto my website. There's a website address, so I'm very bad about updating it with things that I'm doing. If I'm honest, I need to get better. But you can sign up for my mailing list on there, or you can email me to go onto my mailing list, and I'll let you know when I do things. I don't email people a lot. I've been a little quiet over the summer with classes and so on, but I'm currently putting together some Zoom classes and some in-person classes, and I do things like party classes in my garden. So 6 to 8 people will come over and we'll make some stuff, or we'll do a kind of unique herb class for them, and they can often they'll bring lunch, and we'll make a kind of day of it. It's been a fun thing to do through the pandemic. I've got some really nice outdoor teaching space in my garden, so you can email me about that too. But yeah, on Instagram I'm at Paula Grainger, and on Facebook I'm the English Herbalist, and on both of those I paste up lots of stuff about my garden. There's videos of my herb garden as it's gone through the season, and when I'm making things and all that kind of thing.
Thank you so much. This has been fantastic. And thanks everybody for sticking around. And we look forward to seeing you at another event soon. Thank you, Paula.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been great fun.
Indeed.